Now we're going to look at an approach to understanding what happens with avoidance learning from the perspective of evolution and the biological needs of an organism. So this is generally referred to as the biological theory of avoidance. And it starts off with the question of, will a rat learn to run to avoid shock as easily as it will learn to press a lever to avoid shock? So it kind of looks at, does the type of avoidance response matter? And so a lot of researchers at that time period during the 50s and 60s taught rats to press a lever. A rat might press a lever and get some food. Or it might be taught as a response that a rat can make in order to avoid getting shocked. So it could lead to something pleasant like food, or it could lead at least to something like avoiding a shock. And researchers found that when the rats had to make this kind of like an artificial response, it took them forever. It took them many trials to learn how to do it. In contrast, when all the rat had to do was jump or run from one place to another, they tend to learn it really quickly and easily. So a psychologist named Robert Bowles noticed this, and he proposed a theory based on species-specific defense reactions. And so he noticed that if the response is something the animal does naturally when it's afraid, it will probably develop much more quickly. So running away from something that is dangerous seems more natural and intuitive than staying around and pressing a button, right? So he reasoned that when afraid animals engage in these species-specific defense reactions, SSDRs, if the SSDR made by the animal helps it to avoid shock, it will learn it very quickly. If not, the avoidance response would be difficult for the animal to learn. So we can thank Robert Bowles for just noticing something really obvious to us now when we look back, but a lot of researchers at the time were not noticing this and really paying attention to it. So he brought the focus back onto what does the organism need and kind of looking at the evolutionary basis of something as important as learning. So here's one model that describes the way that species-specific defensive responses influence our motivation. So this model is called the Perceptual-Defensive-Recuperative model, and it was developed by Bowles along with a student of his of the time, Michael Fanslow. So the Perceptual-Defensive-Recuperative model, the term is descriptive, so it's going to involve our perception, our defensive reactions, and how we recover. So it's a 3-stage model that goes into effect when there's some potential danger in the environment. So stage 1 is when we perceive the danger. Stage 2 is if we encounter the danger up close and we have to defend ourselves, do whatever it takes to keep ourselves safe. Stage 3 is, okay, if we've successfully survived the encounter, then we enter the recuperation stage, and we sort of will lay low and let our wounds heal and recover. We're going to focus on the defensive stage because that's the one that defines what happens once you're afraid, once you know that there's something threatening out there and you want to avoid it. So expecting a dangerous situation and an unconditional stimulus like a shock could be an example of one. What leads to something that we can probably all relate to, and that would be fear motivation. So we're motivated now by fear and trying to stay safe in the face of danger. Fear motivation does 2 things. It's going to affect our perception. It's going to affect what we notice around us. It's going to make us focus more on cues that might predict danger and not other things. So it's going to allow, let's say, a threatening face or other scary, potentially dangerous things to be noticed more easily. It's also going to affect behavior, including both physical actions and how our nervous system is reacting. So heart rate might go up, blood pressure might go up, and then we might also like run and hide, for example. The fear motivational system is also going to inhibit other forms of motivation. So if someone's pointing a gun at you, you're probably not very hungry at that exact moment. So the fear motivation will inhibit your motivation for food. So that's just a very simple example, but that's the idea, that it takes over. It's sort of the most important form of motivation in the sense that it will be able to inhibit every other form of motivation. It also inhibits pain through the use of endorphins to produce analgesia. So once we're in this fear state, we are less sensitive to pain. Now, you can also then look and see what type of response is made once we're afraid, once we're in this sort of defensive mode. And it turns out that the distance to the predator shapes the type of defensive response seen during the defensive stage. So here we can see the imminence of the threat, or the urgency of the threat, modeled here between the rat and a cat. When the rat's furthest away, but still sort of feeling a little in danger, like maybe it can smell the cat nearby, or, this time yesterday the cat was in the area, so it might still be a little bit on edge. We can think of this as being pre-encounter defense. So there's no cat visible yet, doesn't think the cat is really there yet, but the cat just might be nearby. And when this happens, rats will change their foraging patterns, so they will not go out looking for food quite as often, and when they do find food, they'll eat more of it in that one spot so they don't have to go out again. And so they take these steps to kind of minimize their exposure to threat. However, if that doesn't work and they do encounter the cat, we now enter post-encounter defense because the rat has encountered the cat. Now, rats will either try and freeze so that the cat doesn't notice them, or they might move, run and hide in areas of relative safety. So either stay in place and freeze, don't get noticed, or run and hide and go someplace relatively safe. If that doesn't work and the cat pounces on the rat, then we enter the circus strike defense stage, where the rat does what it can to protect itself. It will jump, bite, and probably have a lot of vocalization, so make a lot of noise, as an attempt to scare and threaten the cat back and make it so that the cat will back off. So we call this the predatory imminence view. The distance between the rat and the cat can be think of as how imminent the threat is. And the more imminent, the more active the defense is. The less imminent, the more the defensive reactions are just very mild efforts to sort of minimize threat. Now, another aspect of sort of looking at things from this biological lens, looking at it from the basis of evolution and what does an animal have to do to stay safe and to be able to survive and reproduce, is that sometimes reinforcement, rewards, for example, don't always work. And so there's this classic work on something called animal misbehavior. And that's just taken as a joke, right? The idea is that animal misbehavior, we from our perspective, from our human perspective, it looks like the animals are misbehaving. But from the animal's perspective, it's doing what it needs to do to stay safe and to be able to eat and reproduce in its environment. And so Breland and Breland, shown here on the right, were a couple of researchers who trained animals in a variety of different ways to do kind of cute things. So here's a bunny rabbit playing the piano. They taught a pig and a raccoon to drop a token into a piggy bank. So they, had a lot of experience teaching animals how to do these sort of interesting things. And in many cases, the animals learned the behaviors, but they started noticing that the animals also started showing some instinctive behaviors. So that instinct started to creep into their learned behaviors. So a good example are the raccoon and the pig that were taught to drop a token into the piggy bank. Each of them, the raccoon and the pig, treated the coin like it was some kind of natural thing for them, natural stimulus, particular food, because the Brelands used food rewards. And so the pig, in this example, makes an association between the token and getting a food reward. So he starts treating this token like as if it was food. Now, pigs act towards food in a certain way. They might root at it with their nose. They're going to do different things to it. It's not natural for any animal really to take perfectly good food and drop it into a container. And so after a while, this pig, after it started making this strong connection and associating the token with food, it started to actually sort of misbehave by not wanting to leave the token in the piggy bank and instead treating the token as if it was food. Same thing with the raccoon. The raccoon started treating the token like it was a mollusk, and so it would, especially if it had 2 tokens, it would, instead of dropping them in the piggy bank, it would sort of bang them together and then drop them on the ground and bang them together, throw them on the ground. He was trying to break up mollusks, so these shellfish that raccoons would normally eat, and so it triggered his instinctive response. And so for him, that was for the raccoon, that was the misbehavior. So they had to teach the raccoon to play basketball instead. The basketball was large enough that it could not be treated in the same way, and so that seemed to work better. So the Brelands are known for, again, pointing out how animal instincts, animals' instinctive behaviors are brought out in these things, and we can't just arbitrarily train an animal to do something that is incompatible with its instinctive behaviors. So they call that instinctive drift, when an operant behavior deteriorates and stops working despite using reinforcement because the activity elicits an animal's instincts instead.